Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical strategies of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, executive and life coach Meredith Oak, with a quick reminder that podcasts are conversations, not consultations, and definitely not medical advice. We're here for informational purposes only. To follow up with our amazing guests, please do check out the show notes, and to stay in the loop with the QBC podcast, join our email list, also linked in the show notes. So we're going to circle back yet again to an overview of why circadian rhythms matter so very much to every single aspect of our health. I don't know about you, but I find sometimes, I go out in the world, I'm mixing with all the people, nobody knows what I'm talking about, and my mind starts to drift, and I start to have these thoughts come floating through, like, do I really need to be doing all this stuff? Have I maybe gone a little overboard with all the red light bulbs and the blue blocking glasses and making everyone go outside as soon as they wake up in the morning? And the answer is yes, it does matter that much. And no, we haven't gone overboard, right? What's gone overboard, what's gotten out of hand is the technology advancement that our biology is not able to keep up with. So we really do have to make it a priority to, do all these crazy sounding things, to protect ourselves and protect our sleep and protect our circadian regulation from all of the short and long-term disasters that can happen when we live continuously out of sync with natural light and dark cycles. So one of my favorite people to talk about that is back on the podcast, Nikko Kennedy. She is a specific expert in the area of conception, pregnancy, and newborns when it comes to circadian rhythm. And there is some really interesting research out that she's going to talk to us about why it matters. Doing this stuff actually matters even before you try to get pregnant. It's kind of crazy. Biology is just so interesting. Anyway, Nikko is so deep into the research and so good at it that she has also recently been hired by the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology as the new director of research. So if you're in any upcoming cohorts, you will be working with her directly. She's also a doula. She's studied biology at the University of Oregon and has completed training from the Childbirth and Postpartum Professional Association, Doula Training Center, the Indy Birth Midwifery School, and the Pacific Birth Institute, not to mention her certification in Applied Quantum Biology. So without further ado, here is Nikko. And as a reminder, what about of all the things I'm talking about, if you do not have blue blockers yet, or your blue blockers got eaten by the dog, go to bondcharge.com. They have really the cutest styles, I think, and get yourself a new pair. If you put QBC in the little box in the code box at checkout, you'll get 15% off. Okay, enjoy. Nikko Kennedy, welcome back to the QBC podcast. Very excited to have you back. And I really wanted to start with the basics. So you and I were just sort of chatting about how we're mostly surrounded by people who really understand why circadian rhythms are so important. And then we go out and you were talking about a client, or I talk to my friends and they're like, what? Really? Well, I don't know. I mean, my doctor's never mentioned it. And I'm like, no, it matters. So give us the bird's eye view of what we mean when we're talking about circadian rhythms, circadian biology, and why it really matters so much.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I love how you set that up, because it is a thing that so many people maybe have heard of it, but probably don't have the whole view of why it's so important. So where I often start with people is okay, you know that you can't effectively be awake and asleep at the same time. It's just not possible. Grogginess is not the same as sleep, nor is it the same as being your full, alert, peppy self, right? The stark difference between those two experiences. We all do. So the circadian rhythm, like that controls your sleep wake cycle, but there are all kinds of other processes throughout the whole body that go through similar processes that can't happen at the same time. So you need to be giving yourself time for each of these different cycles that we're going through. And they're basically aligned along the day night rhythm. That's why we call it the circadian rhythm, which means circa, around, and dia, the day. So like we're talking about what needs to happen around the day for the body to optimally function. So when looking at sleep wake, like one of the biggest misconceptions about the circadian rhythm is that all you have to do is go to sleep and wake up at the same time every day. And a lot of people think, well, I can't wake up and go to sleep at the same time every day. I have to catch up on sleep on the weekends or whatever. I want to go out late and have fun. So I don't care about my circadian rhythm because it's not realistic for me. And they don't realize that trying to control it with an alarm clock is really, really silly because sleep is actually an effect of the circadian rhythm, not a programming factor. So what actually programs the circadian rhythm is your light environment, the light dark cycle, and your feed fast cycle are the two biggest ones. The other ones are your social cues. So like when you have a bright social active day, usually you would have a more solitary quiet night. So like the noise and social environment we're in is a really big way the circadian rhythm is entrained. So those kinds of things don't have anything to do with your alarm clock, right? So it has to do with what your environment is like, what's going on around you, and how that's stimulating your body for activity or setting it up to actually fully rest. And that rest period is the part that most people are deficient in when it comes to circadian rhythm. And if you don't get proper rest, then it's hard to be fully alert. So that's one of the big symptoms is like fatigue and tiredness that doesn't necessarily go away. But long-term living in an environment like that is actually associated with all kinds of big time health issues. Like looking at artificial light at night is now officially designated as a carcinogen. So we all know how huge, like everyone has been impacted by cancer, and that's related to long-term circadian disruption, not having a proper night to rest the body and for it to go through all the other things that need to happen during sleep, not having high quality sleep. But we can also look at the cardiovascular system, the immune system, like any other system in the body. And then in my work, I'm working with families who, are in their childbearing years, and it has huge impacts on the birthing process, on our fertility, on the development of children in the womb, and then afterwards. So there's no aspect of our biology that's not relating to these time cues that we can give just by tuning our environment. So it's a little bit complicated at first, a little bit abstract to think like, wow, if my refrigerator light might be going to give me cancer long term, right? Like that's a big extrapolation. Especially because it's so normal. Like it's been a couple of generations since we've had these really disruptive kinds of lights. And that's the biggest source. Like, estimation 99% of people living in the modern industrial world have an excessive amount of artificial light at night that is significantly suppressing particular hormones and processes that make it so the body can't fully heal at night.
Wow. And so we need to, when we're asleep, we need to be asleep, and we need to mitigate or remove all of the factors that would be telling our body that it's time to be awake. So if we have bright lights, eating, being around lots of people in a big social situation, and we do all of that like right before bedtime, we're not going to get the restorative sleep that we need.
Right, exactly. And then when sleep doesn't have everything that it needs, like those conditions to set up, because it takes a while. So what normally people do is we have these lights. And so when we wake up in the morning, first thing we flip on the lights, and that actually gives kind of an unnatural morning cue. If we were, if we backpedal a bit and just like imagine what life was like before we had artificial lighting and access to food that is like from all around the world, that's always fresh. What would it be like in that time, right? Like when you would wake up, you would need that morning light in order to do anything. You would be unable to start work, start making breakfast or anything while it's really, really dark. That wouldn't make any sense. But now that we have lights anytime, we can easily start our day at 4:30 in the morning to be able to make it to work at 7. I know a lot of people that do that. I used to do that. And experienced a lot of health consequences at that time of always feeling a kind of like heart pounding feeling when you wake up in the morning. That's actually not normal. But one of the big signs of circadian disruption, like in the acute sense, is like if you wake up in the morning and you can't regulate your body temperature, it's like hot and you feel hot and cold and weird. Your heart's kind of poundy. You feel a little bit woozy. A lot of people wake up that way after like a night of partying or something. They'll be like, oh, this is just the symptoms of alcohol. However, like, once I started having kids and I quit drinking, and then I would still sometimes go to parties and things. And then I would wake up the next morning after having not partied and I would have those same feelings. I was like, wow, I thought this hangover was from drinking too much, but I still have the hangover even though I didn't drink anything at all. So it turns out that's actually circadian disruption.
That's so interesting. I had the same experience actually. Like I quit drinking, but I kept going to parties. And I mean, it wasn't as bad, but I was still like, I would wake up, like I would feel terrible the next day and be like, what? I drank water all night. Just FYI, Nikko lives in the forest and she has roosters. So this is just part of the Quantum Biology podcast. There are animals, okay?
I know,
these are the people we like to talk to, and this is what they have. We cannot silence the rooster.
No, I know they're way over there. We're lucky they're not right here. They get really loud sometimes. One time I was shooing them away, and then I ended up feeling really terrible because it turns out the bear was coming down the hill and pestering them. They were coming to me from protection. So then I kind of stopped shooing them away. Yeah.
All right. So we'll just have some rooster background noise and hopefully they're safe from the bears.
Okay. Yep.
And that's really interesting because you also just described symptoms of jet lag.
Yes. Right.
I lived in Hong Kong for several years. And so I would do like Hong Kong to Vancouver or Hong Kong to Toronto. And sometimes it would be not so bad, but there were times where it was like I had the flu. Right. Except for a fever. I had every other symptom of the flu, and it was purely from the jet lag.
Right. It's such a huge thing. And when we look at like a lot of the things that we know about light shift, about like circadian disruptions, it's from looking at night shift people because folks working night shift also experience similar things. And so when they would look at like flight attendants and then their fertility rates and the challenges they would have with their pregnancy, going through jet lag over and over and over again is really not good for development of the baby in the womb and really difficult for like the placental and everything because the hormones that are happening at night are really involved in, like I said, so many of the different processes. So we can look at that kind of research. And I know that in some parts of the world, as soon as a woman becomes pregnant, she immediately gets a pass to get out of night shift if she is working night shift because the impacts are so detrimental to health that it makes it much more likely to have complications of pregnancy. And so that's one of the areas of research that kind of brought all of this to my attention.
Wow. So, yeah, I just want to reiterate because I think, sometimes we're like, it's just jet lag or, it's just my circadian rhythm. Like, does it matter that much? Like my doctor's never mentioned it. My pediatrician's never mentioned it. My naturopath's never mentioned it. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. They haven't read the research. It is basically impossible to be healthy if you're circadian dysregulated on a continuous basis.
Right. And I think, yes, I would completely agree with that. And I really think that there's a big culture shift that needs to happen because a lot of those, things that we talked about are kind of like we culturally think of it as just like part of the ritual of those things. It's like, are you tough enough to handle this? And that people will even be like proud of their ability to tolerate these extreme symptoms, these extreme acute symptoms, what we're talking about. And it's kind of just like part of the ritual, part of the hazing. Like in military circles, for example, that was a big deal. They would, deliberately be shifting the schedules of the soldiers and stuff. And the Navy actually are doing huge pioneering work where they had some really major accidents and found that because they would do they had all these like 5 and a dime or like different schedules they were doing that didn't add up to 24 hours. And so the soldiers would be like on, off, on, off, on, off, and lose their body clock. And then there were some major accidents and they looked into it and like, what are we going to do? And they figured out the circadian rhythm and the importance of that. And when they were testing their soldiers, they, of course, or sailors, they have a unique ability to control the cycles of their sailors because they're in, they have complete control. And so they have really good research about circadian disruption, how to be able to like work a night shift, work around the clock, because that's necessary on a ship without causing circadian disruption. They found that being circadian disrupted caused worse than drunk performance. And so they published a chart too showing like up to like 0.08 and beyond. And like that's where their sailors were operating just from the kind of schedules they were on. So they figured out you have to make the schedule add up to 24 hours. You have to have part of your sleep cycle overlap the natural darkness. And so they would, instead of like the very most they would have someone work overnight would be 12 hours, like a 12 and 12. But they say that's really bad. And I think about people working in medical who often have 12 to 16 hour shifts. And the Navy doesn't do that anymore. They recommend 3, 4, or 5 people covering a shift so that no one's working like ideally 2 hours in the night or 3 or 4. But basically, you don't want to be doing a lot overnight. It's better for that to be a shared burden and the main part of work to be working during the day. So their sailors actually, they don't have night shift sailors. They have everyone works a day shift and then wakes up for a couple hours at night and then goes back to bed in their ideal. So this has huge implications.
So organizing it so that at least part of your sleep is happening at night when it's dark.
Exactly. Yeah.
Makes a difference.
Yeah. So it's not even if you get 8 hours of sleep in the middle of the day, you're not going to be able to function at a high level. You're still going to be having that circadian disruption, potentially worse than drunk kind of. Just like your ability, your cognitive abilities and your physical abilities, right? Like you think slow and you're clumsy.
You've got like a short-term impairment and a long-term health issue.
Long-term health issues. Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of people talk about the long-term health issues, but it's also valuable to think about the short-term impairment. And in my work like this, like what is military? Why is a birth doula reading military research about sleep? And like mothers, their baby comes home and needs care around the clock. And we don't know about what actually programs the circadian rhythm. And so most women are using regular daytime light bulbs when they're taking care of their babies at night. And so this whole idea that motherhood and postpartum is you're going to be completely fatigued. You're going to be, feeling terrible. It's going to be the hardest thing that you've ever been through. It still may be the hardest thing you've ever been through, but it doesn't have to be difficult in those particular ways. If you can actually get your environment right, then we can naturally go into a polyphasic sleep, which is what the Navy found for their sailors, was having them work a little bit in the night, but mainly be working in the day. And so then that splits their sleep. So they either get one full block of sleep, or often they would get like a 6-hour block, and then they would take like a 20-minute to 2-hour nap. And those were scheduled out for them. And then also synchronizing with meal times too. So like getting hot meals on a regular schedule really helps keep the digestive system in order. And so like the main cues are like the light and the digestion. And so that's something that traditionally new moms were always like fed and cared for. And they would, people would be bringing them hot meals, which like meal train idea is starting to bring that tradition back of giving moms like bring them warm food. Because they're going to be going through so much with their sleep. So bringing that food as a way to kind of anchor them through that phase where it's physiological for them to be up around the clock with the baby that needs to be up around the clock, right? So that's where learning from like bringing in all of this cross-disciplinary research, we really come at some specific cultural lifestyle changes where we still are doing all of the human things, but just in a way that doesn't cause such severe disruption.
That is so interesting. I love how you pulled out the salient points from the military research and applied it to new mamas, which seems like totally opposed objectives, but there is definitely overlap, especially in the scheduling factor. So just really quickly on the food then, since we are sort of giving just like a general overview of how to have if you do have to be up at night, how to do it in a more circadian supportive way. So would you be having those meals like in the morning and in the daytime and then ceasing to eat at night? Or do you eat at night if you're in some kind of around the clock situation?
That's a really good question. And I think there's still some nuance to it. One of the things that has really come out in the research is that artificial light, the bright blue light, really dysregulates glucose and like insulin and all of the digestive hormones. And particularly around the carbohydrate digesting pathways. So we're seeing right now like huge rates of gestational diabetes or dysregulated blood sugar in pregnancy. And so I get this question a lot when I'm talking about that, because pregnant women, if they go for if they were to go for 12 hours without eating, what happens is the body will, just because of the hormonal imbalance, usually it will crash the blood sugar and then spike it really, really high. And those really high up and down blood sugar spikes, cause a lot of problems for potentially the baby and how it develops. But part of what's not being looked at in that research are the effects of that artificial blue light on blood sugar at the same time. And we know that artificial blue light is really implicated in the whole epidemic of like diabetes and obesity and blood sugar regulation and blood pressure and all those systems. So with regard to night shift and working around the clock, there are some newer studies that are talking about having night shift workers fast through the night and still eat their meals during the daytime, and that can help correct the circadian misalignment of eating. But again, from my research, knowing that it's specifically the carbohydrates, I'm hearing like a buzz. Are you hearing that? No. Okay. So knowing that it is the carbohydrate pathways, I think there's also room for potentially the ketogenic diet. And that's going back where I pulled this in was actually from looking at the people that lived in the far north climates and what was their life and food like before foods were imported and before we had artificial lights. So there's two sides to the polar. Like we always think about polar winter and how difficult that would be to live in complete darkness. But maybe if you haven't lived it, don't think about how difficult the summer is also when there's just complete brightness. And what's that for sleep? So what would generally happen is, again, a polyphasic sleep rhythm. And then they were basically eating a kind of a ketogenic fat-based diet with a small amount of protein and a small amount of like local foods that usually the plant foods had really high antioxidant values. So that's really different than like a tropical climate where the sunlight is going to be, 12 and 12, and there's abundant produce year round. And abundant seafood, like a lot of, people like seafood is the universal from like tropical up to the far north, like all traditional societies, even if they were inland, traded with the sea to get seafood. So seafood could be like dried and preserved and transported. But before we had all of this modern technology, things like bananas definitely could not be. So that's where I like when looking at the research about meal timing, I'm thinking that we still have a lot of gaps in our knowledge because we don't have, like, we can look at, like, traditionally they would have been eating a high fat, high antioxidant, high protein, low carbohydrate diet when living those times like in a polyphasic around the clock sleep due to either lots of darkness or lots of light. And modern humans have compressed the sleep cycle because we like every day to be the same. And so it's like 16 hours of light and 8 hours of darkness. And then for night shift people, they usually are getting that full time in the night. So it's such a different experience than what our ancestors lived. And so when we talk about like the disruption and the dysregulation that's happening now, it's very multifaceted. And that's part of why I'm so excited with the research that we're going to be doing through the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology, because we have these huge questions that are like, what is the ideal, eating pattern for people working night shift? And then what if night shift changes? What if we don't have a 16-hour night shift? Because going 16 hours without food doesn't make any sense. So long-winded, I like to pull in. I have so much in my head about all of this. So you're like, give me a simple answer. I'm like, great, I'm going to tell you everything that I know.
We love it. We love it.
Yeah. So that when doing like a really long shift, you're going to have to eat at night. When you're pregnant and your metabolism is like, your leptin's just going crazy, you're going to a lot of times pregnant women need to eat at night. It's hard to get all of the food, and then depending on season. So for those times, potentially eating ketogenic could help deal with some of the different blood sugar problems, but even eating a huge amount of protein can still spike glucose like through the mitochondria and how the electron transport chain works. So like I said, it's nuanced, and like working with a practitioner to like track what's happening like as you're going through changes. Like, of course, you can just like know yourself and like see what happens if you kind of experiment with these things. Like if you are, pulling a shift work and be like, oh, well, I'm going to have some nuts and jerky and cheese instead of a donut and a, frappe or whatever kind of like that sugar thing, just knowing that my body is going to be more sensitive to carbohydrates because I'm in a brightly lit environment overnight. So, there's.
Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting. and also, even if you're not doing shift work, if you're just like watching TV and you're not wearing your blue blockers, you're just, got your eyeballs and your skin in front of the blue lit screen, right? And you're eating, and you're eating a treat or a snack or ice cream or chips or something like that. Like, I think it's important to understand that that food is having a much more deleterious effect on your body than if you ate it at 12 noon sitting outside.
Right.
Right. Like,
yeah.
And so even if you're not shift working, this point that you're making, that blue light makes us basically like pre-diabetic. I think I had someone on who was like, we're all pre-diabetic after sunset.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Our body's whole digestive system completely changed. And you can look at it from like, we've been kind of talking about like the hormones, and the hormones are doing different things. But you can also look at it from the microbiome standpoint. And again, we've kind of had this theme of like the acute symptoms, and like the acute symptoms will tell you too, like, because this is something that I know a lot of people have experienced where they go out and they're out, maybe like doing some bar hopping or something. And then the end of the night rolls around and they're like, oh my gosh, that's it. I need a burrito.
Yeah.
Like, you're so much more likely to get food poisoning eating in the middle of the night because your microbiome is like shut down. It's expecting to be resting. And so we actually have different different populations in our guts in the morning versus the night. So like in that sense too, like we know that our microbiome is so important to how we digest food. And so it's doing different things. It fires on a circadian pattern. And we know this because people who are doing microbiome testing were like realized that they needed to standardize their collection times. Otherwise they were going to potentially be getting really
Right.
wackadoodle readings that don't really mean that much unless there's actually like a standardized time that those measurements are taken.
It's so far reaching, right? We think when you think about circadian rhythms and all of
Mm-hmm.
the ways that it impacts short term, long term, digestion, sleep, mood, energy, hormones, fertility, diseases, like all the things. And so the next point I really want to get into is I think it's very tempting to be like, oh my God, another reason we're all screwed because this is just the world now. There's lights at night. I guess I'm done. I guess I'm
Mm-hmm.
cooked. Like, this is my schedule. This is my job. These are my habits and routines. Like, fine, I guess I'm getting cancer. Right. And so let's just talk a little bit for adults. And then I want to get into the children that we don't, like, yes, it would be lovely if we all moved to a hut in the forest and lived by firelight and sunlight and moonlight. However, we're not doing that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's lots and lots of ways to mitigate and minimize the harms and risks if we just understand how to do it without totally turning our life upside down.
Right.
And if we do that most of the time, then some of the time when we want to go to a movie or go to a party late at night or do whatever we want to do, like our body is at least has some resilience to it. So let's just talk about that for a minute, right? Like I'm a
Yeah.
person who has a job. I get up in the morning, I watch TV at night, I'm on my phone. Like, help me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Help me not have to like overhaul my life, but still take my circadian needs into account.
Right. Yeah. So first thing is dealing with the nighttime light environment. Like to me, that is the biggest key. And that's where my journey started, was figuring out that I needed to be blocking blue light at night. And so my very first recommendation to anyone would be, for your home environment, to invest in a set of sleep lights and have some nice low, like amber and red bulbs around your house. They can be motion sensitive. You can get ones that plug into wall outlets, so that you have this low to the floor lighting that keeps you safe. You can still walk around your house and not trip on anything, but then you can shut off all of the overhead lights with the sunset coming, and eventually you can kind of like get like a mix of lights where you'll like have overhead lights, and then you have mid-level lights, and then you have these floor lights. But if you're going to do nothing else, to me, getting those floor lights so that after you do go to sleep, if you have to wake up and do anything, you can be safe and walk around, but not flip on the cortisol switch in the middle of the night. And once you are not running cortisol into the night, you'll find it so much easier to wake up on time in the morning. And when you wake up on time in the morning, the first thing you want to do, no matter what time of day you're waking up, is to go step outside and feel the actual time of day, because you can't have a healthy circadian rhythm that's not in line with the sun. So it doesn't matter what your schedule is. It matters that your body understands what solar time it is. So that's, to me, kind of like the basics of like how to start program your circadian rhythm to be in line with your local location, is just by like having that dark night and then going out to greet the sun in the morning. You can say, "Hello, sun, thank you for being here," or whatever you want to do. It's a great time for meditation. A lot of real, like I get a lot of insights and downloads when I look out, and it's amazing how your mood will shift, because it does things with your hormones. So no matter how like groggy and terrible you feel, if you just go outside and wake up and see the sun, then it's so much more, it just has an uplifting feel to it. And it really doesn't cost all that much time or energy, especially if your lights are good. And then to continue doing that throughout the day. And, a lot of people will ask me about that too. Like, well, I'm so tired. I'm like, well, go out and see the sun and then go back in. And if you still feel like you need a nap, like you can have a nap. But don't miss that morning sunlight, because it's going to fire up, your whole being.
Yes, it really does. And it's so funny because I mentioned this to people and they're like, oh, well, I just like get up and get in the shower.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it doesn't add that much time to your day. Right? Like just like go downstairs and open the front door. If you're in an apartment, go on the balcony or open the window, right? And just like
Mm-hmm.
have that be the first thing.
Right.
And yeah, and notice how you feel because
Mm-hmm.
it's even on a cloudy day, right? Like you do get a
Mm-hmm.
like a slight sort of tingling sensation
Mm-hmm.
and it's very gentle and subtle, but it's there. And
Right.
once you get used to that, you don't even need to think about it. Like you pop awake
Mm-hmm.
and like that's just what you want to do.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I just want to
Mm-hmm.
say that because it can just be even a few minutes just
Mm-hmm.
before you get into what your normal morning routine is.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So that's kind of like the basic like
Right.
introduction to like how do you change it? Like in the larger scale, they're like I'm so inspired by what they're doing down in Florida, and I think there's some in Australia where they have sea turtle lighting ordinances where the entire neighborhoods are lit with circadian lighting. So you can look up pictures of like the sea turtle lights, and it's like when you drive through the neighborhood, and what they were doing is they needed the moon to be the brightest thing in the environment. Because the sea turtles, when they hatch, they're looking for the moon to direct the reflection off of the water to head out to sea where they need to go. But they would see the lights from like the big hotels and the cars and everything, and they would head inland instead and get run over on the roads. And it was horrible. And no one wants to see all the baby sea turtles smashed. The baby sea turtles need to go out to sea. And so these lighting ordinances were put into place where the lighting is warm, low, and shielded to keep it on the ground where we need for safety. But in a way that doesn't disrupt the circadian rhythms of the sea turtles, or it doesn't disrupt, I mean, for humans living in that environment, it doesn't disrupt their circadian rhythm. So that's where I find it so amazing to see like
Oh,
these
what a
huge
beautiful story. I hadn't heard
high
about that.
rises, complete
Oh,
high rises, and they have the before and after pictures. It's actually the pinned post on my Instagram right now because like when I first like now I can tell this story without crying, but when I first like found out about this, like and I would tell it and I would literally have like tears streaming down my face. I'd be like,
that's how I feel right now.
if we can do it for the sea turtles, we can do it for ourselves, right? But like that inspiration for like, protect the wildlife. So in like in Portland, Oregon, where I live and other places too, they also have like they'll have lights out for the migrating birds. Because animals have circadian rhythms too. It's a preserve function, like we talked about. Like microbes have circadian rhythms, plants have circadian rhythms, animals have circadian rhythms, and so when the human environment is actually spilling out and having big impacts on wildlife, and so like these lights out ordinances and these sea turtle lighting, all of these different things are starting to, make a difference for the wildlife, but also the people living in those environments. Another organization that really inspires me is the International Dark Sky Organization. And I volunteer with my local chapter, actually, and they are helping create night sky viewing parts, because what's really amazing about this, like when you get the lighting warm, low, shielded on the ground where we need it, instead of spraying up into the sky, our sky views actually come back. Like, we could have like, you could be sky viewing from downtown LA if this were, put into place, right? And we
wow.
would still have all the lighting that we need to be safe and get around. And it's amazing because like a lot of these were put in, like the idea was to reduce nighttime crime. But we still could have that like viewing. And when the lights change, our eyes actually expand. Like we have an amazing ability for night vision. So it seems kind of scary. Like when you first turn off the lights, my husband and I just went through this. Actually, we turned off the lights and lit a candle, and my husband was like, whoa, this is way too dark. And then like after 5 minutes, we could totally see like the whole room lit by one candle. But like at first it was like, whoa, this is really dark. So same thing with those environments for nighttime crime. And then when you think about like the effects of circadian disruption on people who are like living out in the streets and all of that, like this is so bad for mental health, and especially like can really trigger manic episodes in bipolar and schizophrenic people. So
Right.
it's like, the potential impacts for like a society where we actually had fully circadian lighting in all public spaces. So amazing. And so like that group, like advocacy and awareness building and moving into policy is really inspiring. So like the first level, of course, is like getting your own home right, But then at the next level, I think there's, so much work we could do on the community front.
Absolutely. And those are just such inspiring stories. I did not know about the Circadian Sea Turtle Initiative. I'm
Right.
so happy. I'm going to have to look that up. Beautiful. And it's also a good point, right? It's like, okay, we've got our insides of our houses, what's going on the outside, right? Like there's always that neighbor that leaves those floodlights on outside in the backyard overnight. And it's really bad for the animals. Plus it comes in the windows of the people who live next to you, and just little things. I recently got a hybrid minivan, and you plug it in, and there's like these flashing lights that happen,
right,
that come out as it's charging, and so. Because I know what I know, like I go in and put cardboard over, like I make sure that it's covered in cardboard before I plug it in. And there's also like the EMF aspects of hybrid and electric cars, but I don't know what we're going to do. This is how they're making the cars now. So, but anyway, it was just something that, it was like, because I'm so attuned to this, I'm like, oh, I can't have that. I can't have that light flashing into the forest all night long. That's terrible. So,
right. Yeah.
Just all these little things your mind starts to notice once you become sensitive to these things. Right. Okay. So let's talk about the babies and the children. So, we have established, and it is very well established, and it is very well established in the literature. And if you go to your doctor and you ask about this, and they're like, it's not a big deal, and blue blocking glasses don't really do anything. Like, I'm sure they're experts in lots of other things, but not in this. They haven't read the research. So please, go read the research. If you don't believe us, go look it up. Circadian disruption will make you sick. And if you are already sick, it will be very, very hard to get better if you don't take care of this. So, okay. Just need to say that. I've been around a lot of people lately who don't believe me. So I'm on a bit of a, okay. All right. So that's for adults. So let's talk about our little ones.
Okay. Yes. So let's just start at the beginning and then move through puberty. Like after puberty, they'll be adults, right? Well, kind of. So basically we're looking, childhood from my perspective basically lasts from preconception through the mid 20s, like around 20, 26, 27, I think is when you could say that maturation has completed. So that's a very long period of time that we're talking about. And so preconception, the circadian rhythm is controlling how the sperm and the egg are made and what kind of regulation, like the epigenetics, right? The circadian rhythm is communicating information about where in the earth you are. So if you're getting signals from your local environment, then your body is optimizing your sperm or your egg to be ideally suited as best as it can from your base genome, right? So you have your basic genome and then you have the epigenetics, and the epigenetics are over top. Epi is over the genetics, and that's showing which genes are expressing of all of the options that you have. So the epigenetic regulation is going to be informed by the circadian rhythm of the mother and father, right? So it should be ideally attuned to the local environment, but many people are not in tune with their local environment. They're in tune with artificial light signals that are very confusing, and don't have all of the things that sunlight has. So first problem, right, happens before we're even conceived. Then, and this actually is a common point of recurring miscarriage is so sperm carries specific epigenetic regulation information when the sperm enters the egg. The redox state that the man had been in for the up to 60 days prior to conception, because that's how long it takes the sperm to be made, will then kind of do all of this epigenetic overwriting with the in that first stage. And so sometimes that includes things that are just not going to work. And so for couples, it's really important. And I really, and when I'm working with people, stress that the mother and the father both need to be doing preconception work with their circadian rhythm, and other aspects of their health in order to have like the healthiest possible conception. Then from there, like the baby implants in its mama, and it is getting information about the local time. Its time codes are coming through the mother, and that is going to control like how it forms. Like the very first stages, the first couple of weeks are so important for laying the whole future of the baby's life, because this is when like any like the first stage is like miscarriage is really common. And so a lot of times women won't even know that they've been pregnant or whatever if their fertility is low and they're having these kinds of problems I'm just talking about with the genetics. But if it does implant, then the next thing that needs to happen, aside from all of the structures, is the placental formation. And placenta is like that process is completely, it's really important for melatonin and glutathione and the endocannabinoid system, which is also a circadian system, to be facilitating the placental development. And placental development exactly parallels the development of the heart. Heart defects are the number one congenital malformation that lead to hospitalization of a new baby. And this is being set in the very first weeks of pregnancy. So it's so important for that first trimester for the mama to be getting plenty of sunlight and adequate darkness for sleep, for her circadian rhythm to be really healthy for the environment that she's in, because of the circadian factors controlling how the placenta, the baby, and the baby's heart are forming in that time.
Whoa. Okay. And I think we covered this a little, on the last podcast that we did together, but it's just so crazy. So a mother having a disrupted circadian rhythm in the first trimester of pregnancy can have an effect on the formation of the baby's heart.
Yes. And not just the heart, but every single major like congenital malformation that can happen, aside from the central nervous system, happens in the first trimester. So that's why they do the anatomy scan at 20 weeks, because by 20 weeks, it's set if the baby's going to have a cleft palate or a heart defect or, like limb issues, like deformations of the eye, like any kind of major abnormality is already like by the time you get to 20 weeks, it's already done. So like when you're working on your like second and third trimester health, you're growing the baby, you're still doing like the central nervous system can still have significant issues. But when it comes to everything else, like you're not going to like give your baby any kind of significant structural problem after that point, right? So that's where the first trimester and preconception is so important.
Okay.
Yeah. And the placenta is going to facilitate making it through to a full term pregnancy. And like these days, it's so common. We look at like placental problems are just associated with the preterm birth, the preeclampsia, like all these different problems. And you can look at like oxidative stress, which we talk about, and maybe beyond this one, I've kind of said redox a couple times. And for anyone that wants to learn about that, like can definitely go into my work. And I've explained it and broken it down there. I don't think I'm going to do it today because we're trying to do the circadian side of things, but they're related. And so the baby is getting its signals from its mom. So some of the signals are coming directly through the belly. Like when a mama's belly is exposed to the sunlight, her skin blocks UV light, right? Her skin will absorb the UV light and block it, but infrared light penetrates all the way through into the womb. So the baby's getting like infrared light signals from the outside. And then most other circadian, what we think is happening is that it's mediated through the placenta. So a lot of people think of the placenta as just like nourishing the baby. They don't think of it as like an extension of the baby's heart. And they don't think of it as the time cues that are passing through the placenta. That's the portal where we're also getting these different hormonal cues from the mom to know day from night. Building, just to control all of the things like so that they happen in the right order across the day. And then the mom's circadian rhythm is also then going to be related to the timing of labor and having a physiological labor. Like something like up to half of women in the US are being induced right now. So their providers, like this is a complicated and kind of issue, right? Like there's pressure from the providers to deliver at a particular time. And then the question is, are these women actually not going into labor at the right time? Or is this, where is this pressure coming from and what should we do about it? But one of the things is that before we had all of these artificial light signals, labor onset would almost always be at peak melatonin overnight, because melatonin actually regulates the contractility. I might have slaughtered that word. But it controls like the uterus, how receptive it is to oxytocin. So oxytocin is what we think of as driving the contractions, but melatonin is actually what says like, okay, be sensitive now and let the oxytocin squeeze you. So labor should be starting. So that's not saying that babies are all born at night, but saying that labor would start at night under the influence of melatonin, which is really powerful because melatonin also regulates pain at the peripheral and central nervous system level. So when you have really high circulating melatonin, not only will a woman's contractions be stronger, but she will perceive them as less painful than a woman with lower melatonin.
Wow. So they'll be more effective, but less painful.
Exactly.
If we are circadian optimized.
Yes.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we have that birth process, right? And then melatonin is also a massive free radical scavenger. So we know that in like arrest of descent, we see huge inflammatory cascade. And melatonin should be there to be mopping all of that up and helping keep it into a healthy environment for both the mama and the baby through the birth process. We also have, like I mentioned, the endocannabinoids are under circadian control. Like we should see a huge spike in the circadian endocannabinoid that's called anandamide, which is ananda means bliss. So the bliss hormone should be skyrocketing. And that's made from DHA. So I mentioned seafood earlier. Many women are not eating the seafood that they need. And so if they're circadian disrupted, they haven't been eating very much seafood, then they're coming into their labor where their body should be giving them this pain relieving and contraction strengthening melatonin. They should be getting a huge dose of this anandamide, also prostamides, which help with cervical ripening from the endocannabinoid system again. So if women aren't having those things, then that can contribute to labor not starting, to it being very, very painful, to it not having the like transcendental experience. Because we can also look at dopamine, which is relating to circadian health. Dopamine signals help regulate the timing and frequency so that the contractions are happening at a good cadence. And then serotonin is another daytime hormone that should be skyrocketing during birth to facilitate mental, really, really high serotonin states cause like trance. So like the movement and all of the like gyrations and ecstatic states that women who like you hear all of this stuff about orgasmic birth and like, how does that happen? Well, it happens with all of the hormones working together in an environment that's safe and protected for the woman to really let loose. And contrast that with not only maybe this affecting the timing, but then maybe labor did start in a physiological way, but then at a certain point they were told they needed to head into the hospital. And hospitals at present, we talked about earlier that they need to be getting their lighting on point and have circadian optimized lighting so that when women come into that, their melatonin and hormones can still be flowing. And, we were talking about it kind of from like protecting the night shift workers, that the night shift workers need their melatonin overnight and we need them to be healthy in those environments. But then for the women coming in, also, if there's those bright overhead lights, it's going to turn on cortisol, which then shuts off melatonin. And so many women will be like, oh yeah, labor is progressing fine. And then I went to the hospital and it just stopped.
That's exactly what happened to me with my first baby.
Exactly.
They were like, okay, all right, yeah, take it along. And then they came in like 9 hours later and it was the same stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then at that point, I'm like, okay, well, you know what? Just give me an epidural. Like I was getting through this because there was momentum and
right.
now I can't like, I can't do it forever. And so then you end up at that intervention and then the layers and layers and on it goes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So now we kind of have a picture of like from birth, from the pregnancy through the birth. Okay. So now baby's born. Newborn babies have very different circadian biology. It is not yet mature. It takes about 2 to 3 years for the circadian rhythm to fully mature. So when they're first born, they don't have like we have the temperature cycle. And I kind of wanted to talk about this earlier too, when we were talking about light, that one of the other really, really easy things you can do to make your home more circadian, especially if you're living in like a very urban environment like you described, is to change your thermostat settings, like to bump it up so that in the middle of the day, you're like up in the mid 70s. And then at night, you drop it down to the mid to upper 60s and giving yourself a spread. And that's, I say easy because a lot of people can just program their thermostat to do that automatically for them. And that temperature cue, like temperature is also part of the light spectrum. And in nature, we always see bright light coming along with heat and darkness going along with coolness. And so that's one of the ways that's just really simple that you can be like communicating to your body time of day rather than just going for a static 72 degrees around the clock.
Okay. So another pro tip, like keep things cooler at night.
Right.
Will support all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first circadian signal that comes on with a newborn is the temperature cycle, because our bodies do that naturally too. We're warmer in the day and then it starts to cool off at night. And that's why you get chilly and want to crawl into your blankets at night. So that's the first that comes online with babies. And then the next is the melatonin cycle, because newborn babies don't actually produce any of their own melatonin. So normally they would be getting that from the mom's breast milk. So mom's breast milk will have a big peak of melatonin in the night. And then daytime, she'll be giving those endocannabinoids and the cortisol and other daytime hormones will be in that milk. So that's how the baby's rhythm is, programmed early on. And then after the melatonin rhythm, then they start to get the sleep-wake cycle going more in line with day and light. That's the part everyone looks forward to, is when baby sleep starts consolidating and they sleep more at night and less in the day. So you can facilitate that with like bright lights and, like natural sunlight. And also with being more social and noisy and like putting music on in the day, starting to have friends over and, introducing people, starting to take them to the park, right? Like after the first month and a half or so, then you start getting baby being, just more and more awake every day. And then then the next stages would be like once they start to eat food and be mobile and those kinds of things, then they're eating and eliminating. So like a lot of people don't know that babies, they know that their babies poop in the morning, but they don't think about that as something that they can like facilitate. And so Andrea at Go Diaper Free is a really great resource if any parent is like interested in facilitating that. Like you can have your baby not pooping in diapers really early on. And like, so I like for my babies, we do that. And so like first thing in the morning, like go out and get some sunlight. And since they're a baby, I just bring their potty with them and like have a morning poop looking at the sun on the porch. Again,
That's amazing.
I have a unique ability with my environment to do that.
Yes.
But it's just so amazing, like so much nicer to like not have babies like pooping in their diapers all the time, especially if you use cloth diapers. But even if you don't, it's still like, it's messy. It gets all over them. Whereas if it's just in the potty, then you dump it in the potty and really easy. But that's part of their circadian regulation. Like we all do that. We all wake up and first thing we need to do is go to the bathroom. So babies are the same way. And then as we're getting their food and eating, like eventually, like at first they start out kind of just like eating food all the time. You think about like, toddlers, like how do you keep a toddler happy? Like snacks, they need to eat all the time. And then eventually their meals will start consolidating. And once they're getting to be like 5 and 6 years old, then they can be on a more like standard diet, right? Of like eating like meals a day. And like, yes, they still snack, but they don't need to snack, just like adults don't need to snack. So those are like stages of the circadian progression. And so they kind of say like around age 2 to 3 is when they consider that all of the things that you could measure are like fully mature and independent of the mom.
Wow.
So that's kind of the first
at that
stage.
Point, all of the things that we discussed that are relevant for adults are relevant for children. with the one factor being that they are even more sensitive to toxic light than we are.
Exactly.
So it's all the things we do, they need to do, but it's even more important for them.
Yeah. And that's why earlier I mentioned that I think the very best first step is getting that circadian nighttime light environment with, because I know a lot of people, when dealing with adults will be like, first, just try blue blockers and see how you feel. But with a baby, or a kid, you're not going to be putting blue blockers on them. Hey, baby. And so getting the nighttime environment, like that benefits everybody that's in the environment.
Right.
And so for families, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And like, as we were talking about, hi, Henry.
Yes, baby.
Got a baby in the podcast house. Hi, sweetie. So yeah, as we were talking about, I know that a lot of people, like having some screen time for their kids is like part of the routine, and like, you need it to be able to make dinner or whatever. But so there are ways, if the child is over 5, you could give them blue blockers, or I sometimes like have my daughter watch a movie on the laptop, because we can turn the iris on and make it all orange,
right?
As opposed to the TV where we can't, just little things. So it's you don't have to go cold turkey off the screens, but there are ways to minimize the light and maybe have that screen time like earlier,
right? As
early as possible, and
and consider like that we kind of talked about this last time. And I know
for you, you'd be like, no screen time. I know. But
well, I mean,
for some of us, it's too late.
I work from home and am using, screens to do my work. I do remote consulting with people and make, the education that I do and stuff is all delivered through this. So there is definitely the elements of like, how do we mitigate the technology? Because it is here. I'm not talking about sending everyone back to the time pre. It is a lot more of like in the immediate, there's what can we do with our technology, our homes, and then at the broader scale, what can we do with society as a whole? How can we advocate for better technology, for technology that that is made to be more biologically friendly, like with lighting, and then also with the EMFs, which I think it's worth bringing up here just for a second, that like when people like don't understand what we mean by like electromagnetism, it's like a really big word, and they don't necessarily know that it's just a whole spectrum. And so we talk about light, and that's just part of the visible spectrum. But then like outside of it, we already know that like infrared is light. We can't see it, but we can feel it. UV is light. We can't see the difference between UV light and regular light with our eyes, but we can feel it in our skin. And then if you just expand out from that, these other frequencies that our devices are running for communication are also just light, but they're at frequencies that we can't see with our eyes. But that just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And so we know that light like can dysregulate our, different hormones and things by triggering them to fire at times when they wouldn't normally. And so same thing with these EMFs. It seems that they also have the ability to make our body do things that it wouldn't be doing ordinarily, because it's a consistent signal that's happening at all times in amounts that we wouldn't see in nature. So those do have like those other forms of light. And that's where I think it's really helpful for families. And I also recommend, because they'll ask me this, like, oh, I'm ready to set up my nursery. Like, what should I be thinking about and stuff? I'm like, well, how about I like the Cornet electrosmog meter, because I think it's really user friendly. And like just wave it around, and then you can deal with that information, what you want to do, like wave it next to your Wi-Fi router, wave it next to the electrical power outlets, and then it will give you a reading, and you can see where there are stronger fields, and knowing that those fields are just another form of light that can also be dysregulating to your biology. Then maybe that will change. Maybe it won't change anything except for where you put your crib. Maybe you're going to scoot your crib like 2 or 3 feet to the left or the right instead of where you thought that it was going to sit for the like aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
So things like that.
Yeah. And just all these things to take into account.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Nikko, this has been so enlightening. And, like, listen, I know for everyone listening, it's a lot of information, but it's really worth thinking about, because at the end of the day, the changes are fairly simple, right? Like you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, like getting red light, night lights that are motion detector, you just plug them in, getting a little red light, reading light to clip on your book instead of turning on the big light. Like these are just small little things that can make such a big difference. And once you start to think about it, it doesn't feel overwhelming or complicated. Just like one little thing at a time can have just like such profound impacts on our little ones. And I love that you mentioned the societal level too, because what I find really heartening and inspiring is that there are so many entrepreneurs who start into this research and they just are like, I have to start a company that makes blue blocking glasses. I have to start a company that makes circadian lighting. I have to, right? Like they're like, I can't believe there's no options. Or the daylight computer people, right? Like I have to create a computer that actually thinks about human biology from the ground up, and not something that people have to hack or, find workarounds to make it not harmful. So there's so many options bubbling up, so many options that are already here. So thank you so much for being so clear and insightful and detailed about why it matters.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's always fun to talk with you and to share these things. It's been so profound for my life. So, and then I've also seen it just so profound for the, clients that I work with. And I'm so inspired lately. I've been getting a lot of like second time moms, or later working with one mom who's having her 7th or 8th baby, I think. And so they're like giving me the feedback, because I've experienced it with myself, that my, babies, that the birth and postpartum and everything's so much easier when I have all of this, locked in. And then to have that validation from other people saying like, oh, we avoided the NICU this time around. And, I had my beautiful home birth, and, this was so much easier with this pregnancy than my last one. And, those kinds of things were like, just knowing that it's making such a big difference and really moving the needle for families, and helping them welcome their babies and have that bonding experience, and for it to be just like the beautiful, blissful, like experience that it's meant to be, to like activate and reclaim that human potential to have optimal health through these years. And then to know that that's programming babies that grow up this way, that they have such a lower likelihood of all of these chronic conditions that have just become all too common based on chronic circadian disruption. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much, Nikko.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Woohoo! You made it to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploratory adventure into new realms. Your energy and support are building a different world, and I am so grateful to be on this journey with you. Take care, and thanks.